broadcasting from a game of Chula at the second Shap. This is PoliTreks.
The Prime Directive, the Declaration of Human Rights, the United Federation of Planets, the United Nations, World War II, the Dominion Federation War, the Art of War, the Teachings of Sirach, Jesus Christ, Calus the Unforgettable.
Welcome everyone to PoliTreks, the show where we look at the socio-political happenings of today through the episodes, movies, and philosophy of Star Trek. Now, we're coming back from still some time off, and we have some pretty cool things headed down the pipe for you all, so thank you for your patience. My name is Barry DeFord, and with me is the often imitated, never replicated Mr. Shashank Avaru. How are things in your end of the quadrant, Mr. Avaru?
Namaste, Homo sapiens. I am happy to be back. It's not like I haven't been doing podcasts, because anybody listening to anything on Tricorder probably found me on their shows and they're now just annoyed by my voice. So for those of you who are annoyed, hey, I'm still here, but we're here. PoliTreks is still here. Just a lot of things have been happening, but at least till the end of the year, I think you'll keep getting us more regularly. We have like Barry said, we have a lot more cool things planned and coming down the pipe. So just good stuff coming in overall, positive vibes. The news is going to be tough, but we'll get through it, I promise.
We do promise. And there are some good things coming along as well. And before we get to the news, how, Shashank, can our lovely listeners get a hold of us on the social medias?
People can find us on @PoliTreks on Twitter, PoliTreks on Twitter. That's the same name that you can find us under on Facebook also, I believe. You can definitely leave us a voicemail through the little speak pipe button on our website. That's tricordertransmissions.com/PoliTreks. And you can also listen and leave us reviews on iTunes. We just landed on Spotify. You can leave us a review there. And you can also send us a good old-fashioned tweet to either Barry or I. Barry, how can people find you personally on Twitter, Barry?
Well, you can find me at BJORNDEFJORD on Twitter. And yourself?
GUTTER_HERO. That's how people can get in touch with us personally. But we are everywhere. Get to us, reach us, find us, talk to us. We'd love to talk to you.
Absolutely. And, if you are on our website, you can also check out almost 400 other episodes of the Tricorder Transmissions. There's our supplemental logs, Reading Trek. Well, you will definitely find the my illustrious co-host. You'll find Drawing Treks, Trek Ranks, Trek Profiles, Disco Trek, Shore Leave, The Original Mission, Weekly Trek, where again, you're just going to see even more of Shashank, which is awesome. And announcing our newest show, Queer Trek. We haven't had a chance to talk about it yet since its inception. I was very, very honored to be able to create the music for it. So if you notice a similarity to PoliTreks' music to Queer Treks, then that's because of me. So that's pretty neat.
I was very, very honored to listen to it. That's the contribution that I bought in. But it's a beautiful. Not a lot of people hear this from podcasts, but I truly believe it's one of those podcasts that can change people's lives. It can bring out representation and a way to identify yourself and find your peace and your world through Star Trek. So what we do here is very powerful. I think what they do at Queer Trek is even more powerful, because there is something very life-changing, as I said, and affirming in a lot of ways when people just sit down and talk about, this is my sexual identity and this is how I found it through Star Trek. Yeah. Just beautiful stuff.
Absolutely. And so if you do like any of these shows and you want to support the network for as little as $1 a month, you'll get early access to all of our shows on the network. You'll get a chance to participate in hangouts with hosts. You can get swag. And of course, our eternal love for supporting this work that we love to send out into the ether of the interwebs. So it may be $1, but it's locks in our hearts. The Patreon button is also at the top right side, and so you can just tickle that. It's sort of orange. And if you do have that extra quatloos to send us, it'd be fantastic. So I think with that, let's move on to the news.
Welcome back to the news, everyone. News broke out just not too long ago that through a New York Times report, it's being reported that the Trump administration might try to redefine gender and take the previously assigned transgender definition out of existence. Lots of thoughts here, lots of Star Trek parallels for sure. But Barry, what are your initial thoughts on this? What jumped out at you?
Well, it's what they're saying, right? It's the actual quote from the proposal. It says that sex means a person's status as a male or female is based on immutable biological traits identifiable before birth. The sex listed on a person's birth certificate as originally issued shall constitute definitive proof of a person's sex unless rebutted by reliable genetic evidence. This is an invasive, terrible, dehumanizing sort of thing. We have to remember that this has been an issue for transgendered people for a very long time in Western society, and under no administration before the Trump and Obama administration had this really come up in a real big way for advancing rights. I mean, even if you look back at the way some transgendered people have been portrayed in pop culture, it's never been good. And I applaud Star Trek for their times that they've looked at things, where Riker has fallen in love with a gender neutral individual. This has happened. Data's offspring, of course, gets to pick what gender and sex it would prefer to be. This is not anything new to Star Trek, and I think they've tried as best as they possibly could given the time that they have. But we made some real big headway under the Obama administration, and in my country, it's still, again, an issue that's moving forward, but slowly, and it just shows you how quickly things can change if you get the right group of people, or in this case, the wrong group of people in power.
Just before we get into the Star Trek of it, I wanted to give our listeners some historical context on this. So there have been rights being given to transgender people piece by piece in the years. The first one that I could find is Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act that prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex by an employer with 15 or more employees. Again, that's a problem for places where there are less than 15 people, but that's a different discussion altogether. But the landmark decision came in 2012 when the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, ruled that discriminating against someone because that person is transgender is discrimination based on sex, which violates Title VII. So that seems to be the hallmark definition or the hallmark decision that seemed to have turned things around for transgender people here in the United States. By doing this, I think they're trying to do it, as the article reports, in two ways. They're going to do it from the education department, which would deal with complaints of sex discrimination at schools and colleges receiving financial assistance, and the other is from Health and Human Services. So, long story short, TLDR version, the administration will try to not let these kids go to schools, and they'll not let them get any kind of healthcare, at least government-funded healthcare. So if you don't go to school and you're sick and you don't get your healthcare, that's a good way to eliminate a big sect of the population. It goes back historically. The first thing that jumps to me is the Nazi Party trying to redefine citizens and remove the definition of Jews as people, and just so many things there. But the biggest example within Star Trek to me, when I read this first, is Odo. When the Dominion War was starting, people within themselves did not fight immediately. The infighting did not begin until people realized Odo is one of the enemy. And they did their best over and over to try to get Odo out. Like, they tried to take Odo out, literally. They tried to remove Odo from existence within the confines of Starfleet, and people genuinely had trouble even seeing Odo as one of theirs, even though this was someone who, for their entire existence, had lived a life as part of the larger organization of the Bajorans and the Cardassians and then Starfleet. So just lot of information there. I didn't mean to throw all of that out at once. Just heartbreaking and tragic. But what are What are you thinking, Barry?
Well, I said quite a bit kind of at the start there, but just to kind of respond to you, I think the one thing about Odo is, as he's trying to find his inborn nature, he's being able to explore that a little more freely than I think people who are questioning their gender or don't find themselves aligning to any specific gender norm or binary. And when we say at the beginning of the show, welcome everyone to PoliTreks, we mean ladies, gentlemen, non-binary folk, everyone. Whatever your inborn nature is concerning your identity and gender, it matters and we support it. But I mean, this really wasn't the case even until the landmark piece of legislation by Obama. So in that respect, I think, we're just moving into an area where these human beings are going to be able to express themselves in ways that really truly express who they are as individuals. And I'm just so blown away that here we are, we're just on the precipice of getting into normalization and giving these people a real chance to be themselves. And now it's getting possibly taken away so quickly. I kind of mentioned the Outcast earlier, where Riker falls in love with Soren on her home planet, and it's kind of the opposite, right? She's not supposed to show any feminine traits, and I'm using she because it seems like that's how she wants to identify herself, and she gets into a lot of hot water for it. So I feel like it's kind of a mirror image that TNG tried to do with it, but I don't know, maybe this could be a conversation for the wonderful new show Queer Trek, that I think this is Star Trek's call to action to really push this forward. And I don't know if they already have it planned in season 2 of Discovery or maybe in the new Picard series, but I would love to see a non-binary or a captain who maybe is of a specific sex, but identifies as a different gender and doesn't want to go through what could probably be very easy surgery in the 24th century, but chooses to display his or her gender and sexuality and humanity in a very importantly individual way.
Just one more thing before we get out of this. To talk about the Star Trek of it all, I think if the Next Generation as a show was being made today, I think they would have definitely made more of an effort to make Data a non-binary character.
Yeah, I agree.
Or better yet, Tasha Yar as a non-binary character, because those are characters whose, the entire reason why Dennis Crosby left is because of an episode like Code of Honor, where a character who clearly does not want to be defined by her sexuality is forced to come to terms with that in that episode. But just so much discussion there. It's heartbreaking, it's tragic, and we'll keep you updated. But speaking of call to action, elections are coming up. Here in the US, the midterms are just around the corner. Just a lot. I have been hearing about it from every nook and corner of the news. What have you been hearing, Barry?
Well, it's as loud as it can be, and I'm several hours north of the 49th parallel. So yeah, I guess it's time to vote for you folks, and I guess part of me is I just feel a little bit cynical right now about the whole meal deal, because you look at the way some of these states are gerrymandered and stuff like that, and it's no difference here in Canada. But I think we need to really start thinking about making sure that we vote as much as we possibly can, but I think also creating places of dual power. And I think, to give that a bit of a better understanding, you can create community on your very own and maybe create some distance and some space between this oppressive force that is now running the country and yourself. I mean, I'm not saying break the law or anything like that, but know the laws and that sort of stuff. So my fear is that this vote's going to come through and it's going to rile up some people in ways that we may not want, or it could foment more power for the people who are trying to ruin the lives of transgendered people.
If you have ever been inspired by anything in Star Trek, a line, a scene, a turn of events, no matter what it is, remember that all of that came from action. It came from within the world. It came from a character standing up and deciding this needs to be done. And out of the world, it came from writers and producers and directors and actors getting together, getting off their butts and making this come to reality. If that has inspired you, if you have felt affected by it, if you have felt changed by it, then please go out and vote. I don't care who you vote for. If you are someone who believes that the way the current administration is running is right. I don't know why you're still listening. That would be weird. But if you are one of those people, by all means, go and vote. But do not give up that right. Do not sit back and watch people vote. Do your vote for you. If you do that, what happened in 2016 will happen again. What happened to a lesser degree in 2014 and 2012 with the midterms will happen again. And just if you do not like the policies, vote these people out. No matter where you are, no matter uh, no matter what scenario are you in, you need to make time to go out and vote. I cannot vote. I'm not a citizen of this country, and it's something that I hope to change one day, because that I really miss having that power. And if you have it, please, if you're not going to vote for yourself, go out and vote for me, and make sure you live up to the legacy that Star Trek left behind by taking that call to action.
And remember that Star Trek is all about people working together, and that's super important, because Kirk doesn't get anywhere without his crew, right? Dr. Crusher can't make things happen without her personal staff and making sure she knows that the people on the bridge have her back. These are things that click through the entire series, each and every one of them. I mean, I would honestly say that though I would like to see more of the characters of Discovery doing stuff, they definitely play very important roles and they're relied on. So know that you can rely on each other too. And maybe back to that transgendered thing, if the Trump administration gains more power and they try to push this draconian law forward, and they manage to do it legally, I guess, through the state, I, at this point, don't even recognize its authority to do it. So in that case as well, people can also vote with their feet, and maybe that's what needs to happen too.
Well, there is some more positive news, and unsurprisingly, this positive piece of news comes from our neighbors up north, where one of my favorite people in the world lives. Barry DeFord, what is going on in your country, man?
As of October the 17th, Canada has legalized small usage, recreational usage of the plant marijuana, which is...
Hang on. That's radical, dude.
Now, okay.
You were not expecting that, were you?
No, I definitely wasn't. I'm kind of freaked out now. Wait, what were we talking about? I'm just kidding.
Everything's so meaningless, man.
No, meaningful. Everything is meaningful. No, it's great. I think Canada...
I don't know how pot people talk like. I don't smoke pot. But congratulations. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's a nifty thing. I'm glad that this has happened, and my hope is also, and this is sort of an extra little bit, is I think anyone who's been caught with a bud in their pocket, and I know of friends who have been caught with like the remnants of parts of a marijuana leaf in their plant or in their pants, and they've ended up having to spend the night in jail. They've had to get a criminal record. I think that all those records should be scrubbed clean, because I don't really think that's a thing that's necessarily that important personally. Not being myself who's ever been caught or anything like that, but just empathetic for the people who I know who do have ridiculously stupid little records for having something that really is pretty darn harmless. So yeah, I hope they take that little extra step further and keep moving in that positive direction of treating people and the mental health issues and, the needs and health of a human being, rather than just punishing them for usually trying to medicate away from past traumas or stresses and stuff like that. So it's a good step in the right direction.
There is a really, really cool set of theories that suggests that all religion came from our ancient peoples who just sat down in different parts of the world and took natural drugs, and everything they saw were hallucinations. Like if you don't, I know it sounds outlandish.
No, it doesn't. I know it doesn't at all. I mean, really, just listen to any song ever on the radio, and that person was probably high. I think that was Bill Hicks, the comedian, who said that originally. He's like, anyone, if you like any music at all, the people who had it, really stupid high.
That's the intro, by the way. Piece of trivia to Third Eye by Tool. Just right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, nice catch.
Yeah. But seriously, even if you believe 1% of that, there should be nobody in jail right now for non-violent drug offenses. Like in Star Trek, if the Cardassians can commit genocide over Bejor and then come back and try to live in some sort of harmony with them. And are people in Star Trek are willing to overlook that? Surely, people who had a few pieces of leaves should not be allowed to spend their lives in jails. That just does not make sense to me. And this is a great first step, but I hope Canada paves the way and it releases all their non-violent drug offenders. Because if you are that person who's right now sitting in a jail cell for something that is now legal, that must be the most heartbreaking thing in the world for that person, their family, their community, and just humanity in general. What does it mean when you say, "Oh, remember this thing that we thought was illegal? Never mind, it's legal now," and then we let them be in jails? It's just, it does not make sense to me. And
even Pat Stewart, right? Sir Patrick Stewart, he uses marijuana to alleviate his arthritis pain. And he's become a not very vocal, but vocal enough proponent for the use of it to help with epilepsy and other conditions where marijuana has shown that in moderated use can alleviate pain, discomfort, and keep a person feeling a little bit better. Especially, like cancer treatment, it can help you with getting your appetite back and stuff like that. And it does. I mean, like it's a substance that, if used responsibly, don't operate heavy machinery. Make sure you know your limits if you are going to try it, and you live in a country or state where it is legal. Then make sure you've got someone with you or someone knows where you are. Those sorts of things. You can have more fun with it than not. And I think personally, it's a fine thing to have legal and to try on a weekend if you're, again, with people people with whom you trust. You're not going to do anything crazy or stupid. I mean, there's so many people who die driving with alcohol and stuff like that. So we don't want to turn that into a thing. But as far as I know, it's been so far so good. I haven't seen, nothing's on fire when I look out my window. I'm happy for it. And I'm glad that we've got Star Trek people who are happy for it too.
I have two questions for you, Barry DeFord. One is a serious question, and that is, how high do you think Riker was when he wore that shirtless, weird outfit with that weird earring on his ear, and he went down to that planet to seduce those women? Because there's no way you're not high when you do that.
Well, that's the thing. You never see people in Star Trek really doing any kind of recreational drug. Mostly they just drink. And again, I wonder if TNG was now, if that would be a thing, or if we will see people using some kind of recreational drug other than sort of what we understand as just alcohol, just drinking stuff. I wonder if we will see something like that in the future. That would be interesting.
That leads me to my second question, which I promise is the really serious question. What do you think Starfleet says about people using drugs on the job? Like, maybe not something like cocaine, but do you think for humanoid species it was okay in Starfleet to just, does their replicator have marijuana? Does it produce it for them? Oh, no, it's a genuine question. Maybe I'm an idiot and I shouldn't.
I just love the next iteration of Picard as he's somewhere, instead of going Earl Grey hot, he's just like Genghis Khan, extra sticky.
Yeah.
That would be pretty funny.
But if you think about it seriously, if somebody wants to take it, I'm sure everybody on Risa is high. There is no way Risa is not. People are high and they're just having the time of their lives paradise. Like that does not make sense to me. And realistically, do you think Starfleet has anything against that? Like if Will Crusher is having a really tough time breaking down a test, do you think he just takes a hit of the Jane and then just goes and tops that test? Just a lot of interesting questions. I know you don't have the answers, buddy, and I know I just sprung that on you. But hey, maybe it's an episode,
Yeah, what if about Green Trek or something, right? What are people doing to make their lives a little bit more livable after the stresses of interstellar travel? But I don't know. I guess like for me, it's kind of like if I was to have a evening where I would enjoy this legal substance, or even just other legal substances like a drink or two, I wouldn't want to be manning like the con or ops or commanding a ship or anything like that. That just seems like a bad idea.
But you have to agree, at least on Enterprise, that dilithium core structure that keeps going up and down with the lights, that is definitely something that's awesome for when you're high.
Yeah, just whoom, whoom.
Yeah, come on, that's made for people who are high. I can just imagine
the colors of the TOS bridge and like their hallways and everything like that. I mean, that's definitely a some kind of fever dream.
Oh yeah, I imagine Bill and Ted just being high and watching those lights flicker up and down. Oh my God, man. Anyway, we have gotten off topic. But speaking of topics, we have a wonderful topic today, don't we?
We have a wonderful conversation. And it's one of those happy conversations. Shashank had mentioned before we started recording that it was a happy conversation that became an episode. So we're really looking forward to it. And it's a part of our DS9 25 series, and we hope you enjoy it.
Welcome back, everyone, to our main topic today. We will be continuing our Section 25 series. Barry and I realized that as the year's winding down, we will never have another DS9 25th anniversary again. So we are going to make the rack to Gino while the sun shines and get as many lists of 25s that we can in there. And continuing that, in no particular order today, is 25 things we love about DS9. Obviously, we're going to do our best to bring in a political and a social angle. But if this list is also not, like I said earlier, in any order, it's just 25 things we love. Number 1 could be the most ridiculous thing that we love. And number 25 could be the most important thing that we love. It's just making a list so we can talk about DS9 some more. As if we don't do that enough on this show, Barry. What do you think, Barry? You ready to get this started?
Oh, I'm super excited for this. And you're right. Like, it's so funny how we came up with this idea just at the start of our whole podcast idea altogether. And now it's October, and time flies. So I'm fully cool with DS9 heavy end of the year.
Yeah, by the end of this year, I think people will be tuning into the Christmas show, and they'll find us celebrating. What's the day on DS9? I forget the name of the day, but the day that they all have joy to you and to you.
Oh, right, that one. I forget that day, but I know what you're talking.
Yeah, that'll be our Christmas. That's how deeply we will be in DS9. People who are listening and hate us for not knowing that day, make sure you yell at us on Twitter.
Please do. We need to be yelled at more. We need to be put in our place a lot more. I mean, I'm getting away with murder here. So, Shashank, Star Trek Deep Space Nine was, for I think both of us, very much a formative thing, and I feel like it's a different series than when I watched it originally. And each time I watch it, and I do have these like year-long rewatches of Deep Space Nine, and I'm always finding something else that I love, and that's always a really great thing, because some of the things that I found out that I love about Deep Space Nine, I watched in just my last rewatch. And I mean, that's like rewatch number 14 or something like that. So getting the opportunity to do this, dear listener, Shashank and I both came up with 25 things, meaning it was going to be 50. So we're actually only doing half of that each. So this is also a bit of a labor of which one do we like the most. So there could be some repeats here, and that'd be interesting. Of course, there won't be any guns firing or anything like that, because this isn't a countdown or a list from best to worst. These are all just great things. So Shashank, what's the 25th wonderful thing that you love about Deep Space Nine?
Well said. Before we get there, that festival is called the Gratitude Festival. So there you go. I Googled it. I found it out. I did it. I'm proud of myself.
I stalled while you Googled it. This is perfect.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's why you're co-host, man. That's why the show works, I think. My 25th most favorite thing about Star Trek. And again, no particular order, just a 25 that I wanted to throw out. It's the most obvious, or maybe not the most obvious from a PoliTreks show. I love how political Deep Space Nine is. I love the politics. I love the cultural references. I love the metaphors for real world politics. I love that the biggest, most overarching thread in the entire show is a political crisis. It's two people from different ends of the universe trying to coexist, and one trying to win over another and letting everything get in the way because of that. So, my 25th most favorite thing about DS9, I love how political it is.
I agree. And I think that the politicalness of Deep Space Nine, I mean, they knew that kind of walking in, right? Because like Star Trek originally, here we are having, and I think I'm quoting one of the people on the Deep Space Nine panel from STLV when they're like, Star Trek was to be the wagon train in the stars, right? And Deep Space Nine is, if we go by that Western motif, then Deep Space Nine is, the last outpost on the frontier, and that of course has its sort of political and sociological issues there as well, because the people who are out on the frontier back in those way olden days were on someone else's land at the time. But it's an interesting thing in that sense too, because also the Federation is putting themselves, they're literally like plopping themselves into the middle of this diplomatic dispute that's already started over a post-occupation and a brand new way to get from one side of the galaxy to the next instantaneously. So you're absolutely right. I think this whole show was primed to be political from the start.
And that's what makes it so great, or one of the 25 things that makes it so great. Barry, what is the number 24 on our list?
Well, number 24 really should be number 1, but I just can't wait that long. I want to talk about it now because it's the most important thing for me. It is the father and son relationship between Jake and Sisko. When you see the true, genuine, nurturing love, when he walks into their quarters, Sisko looks at his son and says, "Hey, Jaco," and it's just that casual father-son, I would die for you sort of thing. And I'm not a father, and I had to find a lot of father figures, but when I see that father-son relationship, it really does just give me a sense of what it means to be a man. And it isn't anything macho. It isn't anything, highfalutin in any way. Benjamin Sisko never has to prove to anyone the type of man he is, because he just is that man. And the way he nurtures and loves and shows affection towards his son and supports him, to the point that he lets his son stay behind on an occupied Deep Space Nine during the Dominion War, just shows the type of father that Benjamin is. And it will never, ever cease to bring a great deal of emotion to my heart to see that beautiful relationship between father and son.
I think it was at one of the panels at STLV in which we got to see a video clip from What We Left Behind. It's a fan interaction between Avery Brooks and a young girl who asks him, "What is your favorite mission on the show Deep Space Nine?" And without even taking a beat, he just bends down, sits on one knee to get to her height, and he says, "My favorite mission on the show is raising my son." There is something so beautiful. And at the core of Deep Space Nine, even the show starts off within the first few minutes. That's the relationship that we really see for the first time, is that father and son relationship. And one of the best things about the show is that there are so many episodes that you can actually go back and enjoy this relationship on. The Visitor, of course, but I think one that is often underrated and doesn't get talked about as much is Explorers. I think Explorers is a really good father-son episode. You remember Explorers, Barry? The one with the Star Sail?
I just watched it the other day. Yeah.
That's a really good relationship, and that's a great thing to point out. I'm glad our list is only getting better with picks as they go on. Well, number 23 on the list, and this is just, I'm sorry, I'm just a nerd about the Terran Empire, so I have to say it. Number 23 is how good the Mirror Universe episodes are on Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't imagine what the series would be actually without it. Those are good little escapades that they take.
There is something so powerful about even the mirrors of the characters. Like, one thing that I don't think is often noticed is that Kira is the oppressed in the Prime universe. Most of the time, she's a character that comes from literally an oppressed planet, but in the mirror universe, we get to see the exact opposite of her. She's the oppressor in that universe. Like, there are so many interesting parallels, and you see how Quark is pretty much the same guy. And then you get to see a really cool pirate version of Benjamin Sisko. It's like he's not on Deep Space Nine anymore. He's like a guy just running around trying to get the best out of everyone, like a one man pirate. He's almost like Jack Sparrow in that show, if like from some of the things that he has to do to manipulate and get his way. Just every character relationship is interesting, and it builds up the mythology so well. You find out more about the mirror universe. You get that little nod to Kirk and what happened there, and even the Terok nod that we get to see, and all the characters that we get to see, the costumes we get to see, the various sets on the Mirror Universe episodes, they really transport us and take us into a beautiful world. So, yep, that's number 23.
I fully agree. I've never had any trouble rewatching any of the Mirror episodes. The only thing that always kind of got me about the Mirror episodes, and this is extremely like minute, was Vic Fontaine shows up, not a hologram, and just gets shot up a whole bunch, which always kind of like made me wonder if Jimmy Darren was just like, I always wanted to go down in a hail of gunfire, and he just there, and Ira Bear is just like, yeah, we can probably make that happen. And then that's just what they did for that episode. This is going to come up maybe a little bit later on, but this is something that is going to come back. Yeah, this is going to really come back a lot. And what I'm really getting at is the writers are just always having so much fun with this TV show. And you can see very much them getting to kind of finger paint a little bit more with the Mirror Universe. And yeah, it was just great to see those characters get to kind of let loose a little bit.
Speaking of later on, Barry, what is number 22 on our list?
Oh man, well, if Jake and Sisko are sort of the big piece for me, then the next biggest is watching a revolutionary have to exist in a non-revolutionary world. And it's Kira, just the way she has to change herself and the struggle that she goes through from stem to stern. Like, she starts as a former Bajoran freedom fighter against the Cardassians, and she ends the series in a Starfleet uniform, right? She went from ragtag, guerrilla warfare, attack and disappear kind of sort of stuff, to being a adjunct, like, representative of the Federation in a uniform. And I mean, not to mention, she's also helping liberate Cardassia using similar tactics to what she used in the past. And so watching that entire arc, you could watch the entire series and forget about every other character except for just Kira, and you would still have a very good time with that, with the entire Deep Space Nine series. It could have just been about her, and they had so much more. It was so much more robust.
I don't often say this, but I'm actually glad that in a way we got to not see the Rolaren side of the story. For those of you not in the know, originally that character was going to be Rolaren, and she was going to come back as a regular, but the actress playing it, she decided not to do it. I believe she had other commitments at the time, so they were forced to come up with a new character that pretty much had a similar arc, but not exactly something that went along those same lines. So I'm glad that out of that challenge, Kira was born, and you get to see this incredible character not just integrate into the Starfleet of it all, but you get to see her struggle. There is a real powerful emotional struggle there. You get to see it when she is dealing with Riker. You get to see it when she has to go back to planets and find her old friends who are trying to enlist her into the Maquis. You also get to see how it is something that ties into a religion. And as someone who doesn't identify with a majority of the political parties, this really speaks to you, doesn't it, Barry?
It absolutely does. And that is a funny sort of thought, because I'm not much of a revolutionary by any stretch of the imagination. I read and I teach and stuff like that, but it does make me sort of think of revolutionaries like Che Guevara after the Cuban Revolution, or some of the people who would have fought for the Chinese Revolution and then the fomentation of power, or even being, say, someone who had to fight clandestinely against the Germans in France or in Italy or something like that, or anywhere, and just sort of having then to go back to a different type of normal or to an order. And was that what you were really looking for? So yeah, no, it definitely does cut very close for me. But what's more important to me right now is, what is number 22?
Good transition. I like it. And number 22 also has to do with a number in a weird way. And it is a number that ties into the overall theme of the series that we've been doing. Number 22 for me is the introduction of Section 31. I love that Star Trek Deep Space Nine peered into the workings of Starfleet, and they actually showed us, up until this point, the Starfleet that we have come to accept is imperfect, yes, but ultimately it's a good guy organization. It's full of people who you would imagine have their own versions of, we need to get things done the right way, and everybody needs to be taken care of. That is the understanding that you have. But if you're a Deep Space Nine viewer back in the 90s following the thread along, and you find out that there is a secret organization that has been doing the Starfleet folks' dirty work, so they can put up this veneer of idealism and prime directive. I'm not saying Section 31 is completely over Starfleet and that they have pretty much taken it over, but it's very interesting that they found a way to show that in the real world, this is how governments work, is they put up a veneer, or put up a mask, but underneath there are people doing the dirty work. And for those of you who are interested, you can go back and listen to our Section 31 episode that we did about spies in our star society. But that's 22 for me, buddy. Section 31.
And again, yeah, 22. What a great choice, right? Section 31, of course. Okay, let's be serious and just call the Federation Space America, right? Because that's kind of what it sort of is. So, if you looked at Space America in the 1960s, the closest they come to talking about anyone Secret Service-y is Gary Seven in Assignment Earth. But by the time 1998 rolls around, we know actually that the FBI was involved, their Secret Service was involved in terrible stuff like COINTELPRO, and what they had done to different places like in El Salvador, helping out the United Fruit Company, or what happened in Chile in 1973, or the whole Iran-Contra scandal and stuff like that. You start seeing this darker underbelly of what the Secret Service is doing to keep its country keeping that sort of veneer of security and safety. And I think in a lot of cases, what Deep Space Nine does is it exposes that veneer of the Federation on so many levels, rather than just having a Badmiral like there used to be often in different movies and stuff like that with Star Trek. Now we have this darker, undefinable enemy within the Federation itself. And that they almost sort of replaced the Borg, right? I mean, TNG, I'd say the coolest villain they came up with was the Borg. And I would say Deep Space Nine, that would then be the Section 31, because they retconned the crap out of that afterward, right?
Absolutely. Well said. Great points. I'm glad you're on board with this one, but again, if people are interested, please go back and listen to our Spies in Our Star Society. We definitely get a lot deeper into Section 31. Speaking of one, what's 21 on the list?
Again, also, we are now having a segue off, which I'm fully supportive of. But I also have to ask, can we disagree with each other? This might be really fun. If I'm like, no, that doesn't belong on the list, Shashank, try again. And then you just try to explain yourself, and I just keep repeating, try again. No, that would be mean.
I think I function best when I'm in the position of an underdog. So yes, if you find something on the list, or just to, mess with me, do it, man. I'm more than happy to defend it.
I love you, man.
I love you too, buddy.
This was a segue to end all segues. Number 21 is this bromance from ours. Bashir and O'Brien are a wonderful couple. They start off kind of throwing shade in each other's direction until they kind of have their moment, and then they just spend all of this time playing together. Like they literally go and play pretend on the holodeck, and there's something boyish about it. And again, Deep Space Nine takes masculinity in so many wonderful directions, because it shows the nice side of proper non-toxic masculinity, and that agape love exists in femininity and masculinity, and it does, we can talk a bit about gender and stuff later in another one of the numbers I have for Deep Space Nine. But when you see Bashir and O'Brien interacting with each other, their love is again something just very real, and it's so beautiful and it's sweet, and they just play and they get to be boys sometimes, and I really like that.
It's also very interesting how they chose really the two polar opposite characters on the show. They couldn't be more away from each other on the space station. It's a guy who works inside a clinic, and then it's a guy who works at the underbelly inside machines and in Jeffrey tubes.
Well, they're both kind of doctors.
They are absolutely doctors. And I think in a way that connects them. I think the fact that there are opposites in there also, like for one, Bashir can never settle down with a woman. And O'Brien seems to have settled down, but he keeps having his conflicts while Keiko is away. He keeps having his conflicts while they fight. And in a weird way, they can be there for each other that way too. They're girlfriends that way, and I say that in the best possible way of the word. They're like women do when they get together and they support each other. The show showed that side of them, and it did not hesitate to do that. Plus, I really dig that when they go to the holodeck, Bashir becomes the James Bond and O'Brien becomes the eye patch wearing villain, which is just hilarious to me. I can never get over that.
I always liked it when they were bomber pilots and they came out and they're all gussied up in their Second World War fighter suits, and you're just like, what is happening? And I feel very much that once we perfect holodeck technology, that's what you and I will do.
That's of course our those are our first two holodeck experiences. But if you take that bromance a little seriously too, the relationship takes its toll, especially in episodes like Hippocratic Oath, when they both fundamentally disagree on how the Jem'Hadar should be treated. And in spite of that, that friendship gets stronger as the show goes on, because they have such strong identities, and even though they fight it out and they often disagree, that they can be friends and they can be supportive, they can be vulnerable, and they can be strong. That you get to see that is beautiful. I think Deep Space Nine allows you to really be anyone. It allows you to. It gives you the power of being yourself, and that is my segue into number 20. Number 20 for me is that Deep Space Nine really celebrates identity. It celebrates that Jadzia was a man in her former life, so it shows that she can kiss a woman. This is in the late 90s when things are burning up, especially for American viewers. The whole idea of showing homosexuality is a touchy topic, but on a bigger scale, it shows that Nog can be in Starfleet. It shows that Rom can become an engineer. It shows that Odo can be human. It shows that it does not matter where you start. It matters where you finish. It matters what you aspire to. And it matters that you pursue that goal truly and with an undying sense of sincerity and love. And when you get there, you will be celebrated for it. As someone who was not from the West but always wanted to live here, I can relate to that so much, that there is a show out there that shows me that it does not matter where I start, it matters where I finish.
It's hard to build on that, because you basically hit all the points of a lot of what I want to. We might be repeating ourselves a little bit in the future here, because I think Deep Space Nine normalizes more than the other shows did, right? Like, you think of Kirk and Uhura's kiss, right? There is a bit there are still a lot of caveats kind of put around it. And though I think there are still some caveats put around some of the things they try in Deep Space Nine, and we get some, probably the network was like, hoi, don't do that, or be a little less on that, or something like that. Especially, looking at, say, the possibility of making Garrick and Bashir a love interest with each other, right? That would have been a thing had it have been approved of, I think. And the amount of twisting and gymnastics they had to do to make Jadzia be able to kiss her former lover, though I agree with you that it made a lot of sense and it was good that they did it, they still had to kind of thread it through the eye of a needle to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
And so I appreciate how much Deep Space Nine was able to normalize, though, and you're right with the points you made.
Great points, Barry. What's number 19?
Well, I'm not one to hit on 19, so this is where I need to put it, because of course, if you go any further, 21's far too close and the odds just aren't in your favor. Of course, I'm much better at Dabo. And that, of course, is Mr. Quark and his lovely little pastiche of capitalism that he threads into the Federation and into Deep Space Nine, because he was there first. The Federation would have never let him be there had this have been their station to begin with. And so it is a really neat way to watch how characters in a post-capitalistic society watch and interact with someone who lives within a capitalistic society. And it becomes almost cultural. And on a couple of levels, I find that entertaining, amusing, and troubling, but it was always interesting watching Quark and the way he speaks. And to a degree, there has to be a bit of thumbing one's nose, or perhaps a critique of the current, more corrupt version of capitalism that exists. And maybe that's its default. I'm not to say one way or another, I guess. I have my opinions. But anyways, it's always entertaining to watch Quark talk about capitalism as if it's a virtue. And you know that everyone knows that this is meant to be funny. And that's just always an interesting, very light. It's not a bonk bonk on the head. It's definitely a tap tap on the shoulder.
One of the coolest things about DS9 is that it approaches a lot of serious subjects by immersing it in humor. One prime example is of, yes, the Ferengis, Quark specifically, when he talks about things like capitalism and he celebrates how much he is mooching off of people. And it's also, while funny, if you sit down and think about it, in spite of it being a post-scarcity society in which something like capitalism you think wouldn't even need to exist, for that station to function, they needed that bar. They needed that bar. They needed that competing bar. They needed the restaurants. They needed a lot of these capitalist places so people could go spend their money and have a good time. So I wonder often if, in spite of that post-scarcity, if we needed that kind of capitalist institutions, if we need people like Quark sitting in that bar giving us watered-down drinks so the society in itself can survive. If Deep Space Nine is a metaphor for the way the world works, definitely our station itself is a metaphor for the melting pot, and it's a metaphor for people of different ideologies and from people from all over coming and living together. And I often wonder if, no matter how good or how bad things are, if we need that capitalism to survive.
I would say we don't, but I understand where you're coming from in terms of how that diversity makes strength. But I would say that had Quark have gotten his way, he would have done what every capitalist tries to do and become the only game in town. And that was one of his biggest problems. And so that's sort of an interesting way of looking at it, because the competition isn't a problem. But when you start getting these underhanded methods and stuff, that's where I find Quark's actions to be sort of a very light tap on the shoulder that Deep Space Nine does. But enough about me. I'm going to give you the next one for $17.99. And you can round up to number 18 if you'd like.
You're killing it with the segues today, man. I don't know if I can keep up. God knows I'm going to try. But my number 18 is Gul Dukat. I wanted to come up with a cool introduction. I wanted to come up with a really cool, weird, deep voice where I start talking like Gul Dukat. But that's the worst Gul Dukat impression. So I'm just going to say number 18 is... and this might be a confession that I don't know if many people have heard me say anywhere on the air. So here goes. I think Gul Dukat is the best Star Trek villain. And I am so glad that Deep Space Nine gave me Gul Dukat. It gave me a villain that I fell in love with, a villain that, in spite of the horrible, unforgivable things that he did, I was so forced to see his point of view. And that's where the best villains come from in all of fiction, is when you read about them and you know how terrible they are, when you know the things they're doing so bad, and yet you can't help but break down when they're crying over their dead daughter. And you can't help but smile with him when he is making a really funny, smart point while trying to one up Cisco. Just Gul Dukat is amazing. He's an incredible villain, and he is the best villain not because he is a really strong, powerful character, but because the show makes sure no matter how rigid you are in your opinion, you are forced to empathize with someone like Gul Dukat and try to understand that point of view. So, number 18, Gul Dukat.
I agree again. This is more difficult than I thought to disagree about certain things. You and I have too much in common. But I would say Gul Dukat and Q are interesting because they are both sort of a prime antagonist in either of the series' arcs. And when you look at it, though, every good villain needs to be a foil, and every good foil needs to have some villainous qualities, or at least antagonistic qualities towards the main character. And when we look at Picard, Cisco, and their connections and their values and how they run themselves and stuff like that, when you look at Dukat and Q, you see Q as a bit more of a foil than a villain, and you see Gul Dukat a bit more of a villain than a foil. But they both occupy both of those titles really, really well. And yeah, he is the best Star Trek villain. He has to be. And it's because he had so much time to bake properly, and he emerged as this great villain in the end. And I feel like every single night the casting people for Deep Space Nine should be falling asleep counting their blessings that they got Marco Limo to do it, because man, that guy is a salty actor. Man, he's good.
For those of you who are in attendance, I'm sure everybody remembers that moment when after the airing of Far Beyond the Stars, he's on stage and he says, well, we're cops, and yes, we shot a black man, but at least we didn't shoot him from the back. In his hoodie 6 times. That just goes to show what kind of an incredible actor he is. And not just the casting people. I, for one, am very lucky that he got to do it. So, Barry, as a reward for you agreeing with me, I'm going to let you pick number 17 on the list.
That is the nicest thing anyone's ever done for me. So I'm just going to keep this running with, we were talking about that whole group of people at the Far Beyond the Stars panel. And we're going to rub the nose of anyone who didn't go to STLV into this a lot, because we went there and it was loads of fun. So it's got to be the writers themselves, right? You know, like, what can I honestly say about Ira Steven Behr, other than just how incredibly amazing the world that he helped create, that he put into motion. It's, oh my gosh, like, I definitely have to give Rick Berman and Michael Piller obviously the cred for coming up with the idea itself, but getting Ira Steven Behr on there and what he did and his little, revolutionary thing he did with it, like, he's got that sort of sense to him. And just even starting there, right, we see how amazing it truly was. And Michael Piller, obviously, that guy he makes lightning in a bottle seem easy. Michael Piller, again, also brings a amazing tact to Deep Space Nine, and he sort of sets it up. And to use a 90s sort of reference, Michael Piller laces the track, and then Ira Steven Behr locks the flow. And it was a beautiful moment. Now, of course, we've got Renee Echevarria. We've got Ron D. Moore, who's in there as well. I mean, Ron D. Moore was fantastic. We've got Hans Beimler, Robert Hewitt Wolf, all of these fantastic people who just created an amazing series. And I feel like I'm stumbling over myself because there's so much I want to say. But yeah, that would be a big one.
Yeah, every time you say writers, no matter who you talk about, the show has so many good episodes that you can't help but enjoy everything that the writers brought to a table. What I wouldn't give as a writer to be in that writer's room, that would have been a dream come true. But it's interesting that there are so many really cool facets about the show. There is that deep, real Star Trek politics that the show goes into, with incredible episodes like Homefront. And then you have episodes like Far Beyond the Stars that say a lot directly about the world that we live in today. And then you have episodes like Sword of Kalis and Sons of Mog that go so deep into Klingon mythology, a species that doesn't exist. And you fall in love with the mythological aspect of the show. And I also think that the writing is particularly good, not just because it excels on that episode level, but even in scenes, just the opening scene of In the Pale Moonlight, or that one scene at Quark's where Quark and Garrick talk about root beer. Just from a scene to an episode to an opening to a overarching plot thread, those writers are incredible. And I don't think we'll ever have a more challenged, more competing, fighting to get to the top writers who end up giving us some of the best television that will ever be made. So, yep, that was a great one, man.
So it is time for our Sweet 16. And of course, you're the homecoming queen. What's number 16?
In keeping with our one-ups about the segues, number 16 is going to be sweet, or maybe not so sweet when it comes to things like Gah. We just talked about it. Number 16 for me is how good the Klingons are on Deep Space Nine. Not because they're particularly any more toned in, or they're particularly different or interesting when it comes to how they interact with other species on the show. But I love that Rondi Moore pretty much reinvented Klingons. He gave us an invigorated, a revitalized interest in Klingons and Klingon mythology. As I was just saying, Sword of Kalis. I can sit and watch Sword of Kalis so just over and over and over. And I don't need to know anything about that show to know that that is just an incredible episode. That is a metaphor for people having lost their way, people inventing lies and religions like they do around the world, and how Worf ties that in so well when we start with him in the way of the warrior. And you get to see that character get a second life on the show. We think he's done with on TNG, and then he comes back and he cements himself as not only an incredible character, but someone who can hold his own against titans like Cisco and Kira. And it's because he has that heavy mythology. And then you get to see someone integrate into the world of the Klingons, like Jadzia, who falls in love with Worf. And then you get to see that side of the story. So Klingons, not just particularly because of the way they interact, but because we actually get to see so much about the world that they live in. We get to see about Kronos. We get to see about the rituals. We get to see the things that Worf has to do as he accepts that side of himself more and more. And on a side note, I don't think we would have gotten the really rich, incredible-looking Klingons in Star Trek Discovery if it wasn't for Deep Space Nine and Rondi Moore making their best to give that species a mythology.
You can totally see the influence of the Deep Space Nine Klingon on the Discovery Klingon. You're absolutely right. And that adherence to honor and the religiosity did not exist before it got into the hands of people like Rondi Moore. And I will say this to the ends of the earth: though he may not have writing credits for the Klingons, Michael Dorn made the Klingons what they are. He took the characterization that the writers had and he made that real. He did the extra work of embodying the idea and the direction that the Klingons took. So yes, bringing Michael Dorn back as Worf for the majority of the series was wonderful, because you did get to see his character grow even more. And it was good that he kind of got to be the new almost Data, right? Data was always searching to be human, and now you've got Worf searching to be Klingon in such a very sort of actualizing kind of Hegelian way. And then, lump that into him marrying Jadzia, and that's whole piece of it where she's accepting the culture, and it's this great way for us as viewers to get even deeper into the Klingon mythology. I mean, I think that has to be some of the best reasons why Klingon is such a robust language and all these sorts of things. So yeah, no, you're 100% correct.
Barry, here is the million slips of Latinum question. What's number 15 on the list?
You say I'm going to get lax of Latinum?
Yes.
I'd prefer crore, but I'll take lax, truly.
Nice.
it's speaking of money and stuff. I'm gonna sit myself down at the bar and have a nice long conversation with Morn. I love his running gag. It doesn't need to be there. There's no real purpose for it. It's 100% just the writers and the actors just having a laugh. Like they're just totally being like, I don't know. There's just something about Morn throughout the entire series. And again, this is a nod to Cheers, and even he kind of looks like Norm from Cheers, and it's just so extremely perfect. There isn't really much else to say about this, but if you take that Western idea and stuff like that, this goes right back to the earliest pieces of television and stuff, with these little running gags that make their way through an entire series. And this is a drama series as well. So to have this little piece of humor and just the constant just return to him as a character is beautiful. It's so much fun, and it lightens things up, and it just shows that though it's a serious series, they don't always have to take themselves seriously.
Interesting note, as you were talking about Norm from Cheers, did you ever notice that Mon is an anagram for non?
Absolutely.
And I'm sure that was intentional too. I bet the actor who played Mon sat down every day for that elaborate makeup job that I'm sure would have taken hours upon hours just to sit down at that bar and be a glorified extra. Like that's really what that character is. At least when the show starts out, he's just an extra. He's just there in the background. But the coolest thing about Mon is he ends up being one of the integral parts of the show and things that keeps it light and fresh, even though he never says a word. People talk about Mon. They talk about how he can't shut up. A beautiful woman show up and they go, "Oh yeah, I used to be engaged to Mon." And you want, what just happened? What universe am I in?
Well,
And all of that culminates when you see who mourns for Mon. And he gets an entire episode to himself. So that was a great one, man. Mon is definitely an intriguing, fascinating part of that show.
did you know that Morn's first appearance was in Birthright Part 1 of Star Trek The Next Generation?
No, I did not. That's a really cool piece of trivia.
Yeah, pretty crazy. But anyways, Mark Allen Shepard, everyone. 14 only comes around once in this list, so I'm expecting you to make it good, Mr. Avaru.
I think I'm going to make it. I'm going to make it the best. We have been singing through this list so far, so it only seems right to point out that number 14 on the list is the theme song of Deep Space Nine. It's my personal favorite of all the theme songs. I can almost play that, and I do play it as my alarm tone. It's a really good tone to wake up to every morning. And I know it went into a bit of a revitalization. I want to say around season 4 or 5. I could be getting that wrong. But the fact that there is those incredible high notes in there, and the way it starts off with that, even the visuals are so good about the theme song when you get to see Deep Space Nine from afar and then you bring it in. It's so fascinating, and the way the music plays, it's perfect. It describes that show so well, and I don't know if they will ever come up with a better theme song. No disrespect intended to any of the other ones. I'm sure the classic is a big favorite, but Deep Space Nine's theme song all the way, man.
Well, I always think of that as very much like the outpost, right? The American Western outpost on the Rocky Mountains in Wyoming kind of thing. It's the last one before you end up in Crow territory kind of thing. And it's the Morning Bugler, right? It's very sort of, I don't know, it's a frontier-y kind of song, right? It's a triumphal sort of, we've harnessed nature and now find ourselves in the far reaches and the steppe of this great plateau kind of thing. It really does. It reminds me, when I first heard it, it reminded me of kind of a sort of a Lonesome Dove kind of Western.
Dennis McCarthy gets a lot of credit for, rightly so, for being such a big part of the music of Star Trek, but this, I think, is one of his crowning achievements. And again, another rubbing it in thing for people who didn't attend STLV. You got to see this clip where they pay tribute to Dennis McCarthy when they're talking about the music of Star Trek, and this theme song shows why. It's a beautiful theme song. So that's number 14 on the list. Barry, you're lucky, or I should say unlucky, for getting number 13 on the list. What's number 13, man?
Well, I thought I would just go right directly to the Last Supper here with the idea of there being 13 numbers left in this list, and I'm going to go with Star Trek's use of religion. This is not common in previous Star Trek. So for Star Trek Deep Space Nine to really go into the religious aspect and show its place within society and within people's lives and how it can affect people differently and all of the politics that surround it, right? You see Bajoran religion, you see a much more religious style of Klingon, and of course we do see that even stronger in Discovery. And you get to see the religiosity of the Vorta towards the founders and that sort of almost fanatical religious undertones of the Jem'Hadar. And of course, finally, you have the arc of Sisko being a religious person without even knowing it, right? He is called to action, right? He is sort of like future Moses in some cases in that sense, where he didn't even know he had that royalty to him, right? He didn't know his mother was actually one of these entities or had one of these entities in her and stuff. It's a very interesting sort of connection I make that is very Old Testament-y, kind of style to it. And Avery Brooks takes that religiosity. That man's got soul, right? Like even when he could read the phone book to me anytime he wants because his voice is just so amazing. But he has almost a preacher's vibe to him when he really gives these larger talks and stuff like that. Would you agree?
I absolutely agree, Barry. And just to add to the beautiful points you bring up, you also get to see money as religion when you see how the Ferengis work, and it's almost blasphemous to them that somebody would get a discount or somebody would get a fair deal. It's funny on the surface, but when you see capitalism as religion, there is a really interesting fanatical aspect to that too. And as a Hindu or someone who was raised Hindu, I saw a lot of Hinduism in the Bajoran people, the way they work, the way they have orbs, and how they worship idols, and just so many really cool metaphors there. But even the founders, when you think about it, when you go to the planet of the founders, the place itself looks really religious. It looks like something out of myth, especially when they're in the middle of that ocean, and it just, or when you go into the beautiful, vast, endless greenery of the place, and you see Odo falling in love with that place, and just there are so many really great aspects of religion, and the show does not take a side on it. It actually shows you how religion can be good, because Kira is such a devoted Bajoran who loves a religion. And then you have characters who are not religious at all, like Odo, who end up finding something about themselves and they reject it in favor of humanity. So it doesn't take a side. It actually lets you make your own decision. And I think that's one of the show's greatest strengths, is it, by staying neutral and just devoting itself to the story aspect of religion, it does so well on all accounts.
12 Bells and Chinook has some more awesomeness for us.
Well, this is going to come up on one of our lists, so I might as well get to it, because I know if I don't, you will. Number 12 is going to be dedicated to one of the finest arts of television, Far Beyond the Stars. I don't think there is anything more that I really can say that hasn't already been said about that episode. But by taking itself away from starships and planets and every dopey little science thing that we nerds care about, and forcing us to look at something really, really deep and rooted to the world that we live in, and giving us a really good story out of it. And making us wonder about the nature of reality. By doing all those things at once, Far Beyond the Stars is far and away, no pun intended, one of the best hours of television.
I think you can have that pun. Also, I hate you right now because that was my next pick. So, I tell you
I told you, man. I told you one of us was going to get to it.
What a guy. No, this is my favorite hour of Star Trek. And I know others have said The Visitor. And yeah, that's that might come up. But yeah, Far Beyond the Stars, it's when you see the pieces that make up Benny Russell, you definitely see little bits of Malcolm X and little bits of Martin Luther King and the plight and the push and the fight that African American people had to take to even just be people, right? I would highly recommend to people who can handle, violence, real violence, to watch a documentary called Made in America, The Crips and the Bloods. And even if you just watch the first act where they talk about when they were young in the 1950s, these young, or now I guess older black men talking about the different groups that they would, these clubs that they would create that eventually would sort of provide the framework for gangs in the future. And it had so much to do with the idea that they were like, this one guy just like rattles off everything about the Boy Scouts. And then he goes, so when I was a kid, my mom took me to the local group of the Boy Scouts and they said, you can't come in because you're black. And then he's like, yeah, truth, justice, blah, 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 honesty. Yeah, the Boy Scouts, bunch of racists. And you're just like, whoa, that's insane. But it's true because like they didn't get the chance to be people in the same sort of way. And Far Beyond the Stars just hits you so hard, and watching that breakdown that Benny Russell has at the end, it's so incredibly powerful. And then finding out that was a second take, that poor Avery Brooks had to do that over again, but he had so much gravitas and so much power and strength and honor while doing it. I can't say enough about it. This could be just one episode. It should be one episode. We should come back to this.
Barry, those are great points. We love so much about Deep Space Nine that I bet somewhere along our 25 things that we love about the show, we lost a number. So I'm sure either we'll go back and edit it, or we'll add something at the end, or maybe it's like a really cool Patreon extra where people sign up for 25 and they only hear 24 things. But either
find
way,
the missing number.
Yeah, either way, we're going to leave all of this on the recording just to show you how unprofessional we are. And yes, please yell at us on Twitter. We'll enjoy that quite a bit. But not to waste any more time, Barry, for all those wonderful points, you get to pick number 11.
11 is great because it is the concept of post-occupation anywhere, and the amounts of strange things that come of it, the amount of just different things that you now have to reassociate yourself with. Day-to-day life becomes more day-to-day, and you start living outside of a trauma, right? Bajor was a planet being abused. It was put under a type of trauma, and it's a trauma that you can't just walk away from. And I sort of think, like, imagine being in like a really long hospital stay or being in prison for a really long time. Associating yourself to things that you wouldn't have had before is extremely difficult, and there can be almost an identity crisis. And you see Bajor sort of go through with that, and you see the power politics of Kai Wynn coming through and edging out other people, other Vedics to take the position of Kai. And you can see that again in Kira. Again, I'm not talking about her as a revolutionary in this sense, but basically as someone who is trying to reassert her identity as a Bajoran, because that was taken for such a long period of time. And I mean, when you see Rolaren show up in the Next Generation, obviously she shows up with this chip on her shoulder, representing the Bajorans and who they are and how they are and stuff like that. It is a fascinating thing to see the fact that the Federation, in its benign, I guess, ways, it decides to not help in anything but the refacilitation of a society out of a occupation. And in that sense, they almost become occupiers, or sort of work as sort of a adjunct or benign occupier. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think in a weird way, the Federation, with its access to everything in the universe. It literally has gone to farther than anybody has gone in the universe, right? And still it is bound by the prime directive. It is bound to only refacilitate. It is bound only to stop after that facilitation is done. Here's a question for our listeners. I'd love to listen to people shout out their answers. In that way, in that regard alone, from the point that Barry's bringing, do you think prime directive is really the most useful way to go about it? Or do you think in situations like where Kaiwin is just taking over and Cisco can do nothing but watch, do you think the prime directive would need to be tweaked? Or maybe there should be a directive that should allow them to intervene in such situations and really look out for the good of the people? What do our listeners think? I'd really be interested in knowing that.
Yeah, the prime directive's a hot mess. But anyways, we're at 10. We're at the final countdown.
Na 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 na. Na 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 na. We should just do that for the rest of the episode because it's such a good song. But in lists, when they come up with lists, often number 10 is really the throwaway. It's often the most overlooked. And that's why number 10, I think fittingly, is going to be my pick for some of the most overlooked stuff about the show. And that's all the background elements of Deep Space Nine. The people walking around that you'll never know their names of on the promenade. The music that plays when they engage the communicator. Everything about that show that is in the background that you never care to look at again. The elevator sound when they go up from one level to another. The Jeffrey's tube sound when O'Brien pops open a hatch. The music, the sets, the extras, some of them who never speak, literally like Mon, even though we talked about Mon. The background people, the people that really make it come alive. And to the unsung heroes, much like number 10 on most lists, this number 10 will be dedicated to the background elements of Deep Space Nine.
I like that. I've always found myself scanning the consoles because they were Cardassian buttons, and I always find that kind of interesting. And it makes me think of typewriters. So I know you're not like you're saying like the background people and things and all that little bit, and I'm really honing in on a obsession that I've always sort of had. I have an obsession with different types of keyboards and like how that would like mess with your brain for such a long time to switch to a different type of keyboard. And the keyboard we have is actually designed in a way to slow your writing down or your typing down, because this was designed to slow down the hammers on the typewriter, because we can in fact type faster than those little metal hammers could swing. That might not be the real name for it, and I refuse to Google it. They're just now called typewriter hammers. And if someone wants to at me about that, you go right ahead. Anyways, there's these other key organizations that is always really interesting to watch. All these other arrays of keys and how they are. And I often thought like that must be crazy. Imagine like being upset with yourself, being like, oh, I'm transferring to Deep Space Nine, and they use this completely different layout. It's wholly alien to me, and yet people just seem to sort of switch over to it really, really fast. It's sort of like maybe it as a political bent, it could show that Windows and Mac can really work side by side.
At this point, on a separate note, we have said people to at us so many times. Now I'd just be offended if nobody atted us.
Please at us. We're lonely.
Barry, what's number 9 on the list now?
Well, number 9, and this is actually something that I've always really liked. Deep Space Nine bottle episodes are the creme de la creme of vanity projects. I find, like, if you think about these unconnected episodes that just come out of nowhere, ones that come to mind immediately for me are like Bada Bing, Bada Bang. Holy cow. It's just a total holosuite episode. You're right. I'm blanking on the name of it, but when they get stuck in the pattern buffer and have to end up on the holodeck, all of them to keep their patterns alive for a period of time, and they're all like James Bond villains and stuff like that. Again, just they just find the best possible reason to do it and then just go ahead. The writers seem to. They're like, I want to do I'm just obsessed with the 1960s Vegas crooners, so I'm just going to shoehorn this character in, and we're just going to have fun with him for the rest of the season. And he's one of the best characters, and it blows your mind if that's the sense, right? And they got Jimmy freaking Darren to do it, right? Like, he was on like what was it called? The one with Bill Shatner, T.J. Hooker.
Boston Legal?
No,
Boston
T.J.
Legal?
Hooker. And he's a really good singer, right? Like, he's amazing. And there he is, just way back in the day, playing with like Heather Locklear and William Shatner. And yeah, he's one of the best characters. But then like other bottle episodes that just blow your mind, like Trials and Tribulations, where they went through all of this trouble to do this little bottle episode that really it's a throwaway. Like it advances nothing. It's literally just let's take a break from this like horrifying Dominion arc. But then you go even further back to like Move Along Home, and you're just like, what the heck is going on? Like, what are they thinking? But at the same time, we just talk about these bottle episodes all the time. When my dogs come running at me when I come home, I always shout "A la Marine." So I don't know. It's a thing.
The Vanity Projects does seem like a really cool deviation to go through, but I'm glad that they did it because in a weird, vicarious way, I got to see my Brown James Bond when I got to see Dr. Bashir go into the holodeck. He was living out his vanity, which is absolutely the point of what he's doing. That's not even hidden in anywhere. So the big connection that I have to those vanity projects is I'm so glad they did it because I got to see a Brown James Bond years before we could even get one. And now literally decades before you could get one because people are still talking about whether the next one should maybe be not white. So number 9 is a great segue into number 8. And number 8 for me is Dr. Julian Bashir. Dr. Bashir, or Julian as I lovingly call him, is one of the most interesting characters in all of Star Trek. I know he's not on everyone's top lists, and I get that, because to a large amount of the viewing audience, I'm sure people gave up on him being a really cool character when they found out they tried to make him like Data, where he was genetically mutated by his parents. I'm sure there's a lot of conflict that goes into when people watch that. But to me, on a personal level, having a brown lead in a show and in a franchise that I love was a huge deal to me. And that I got to see that not just in one episode or 2 episodes, but over an entire show, and even let that bleed into TNG for a couple of episodes, that I got to see Dr. Julian's Bashir arc from when he steps in the pilot and says frontier medicine, and that's what he wants to pursue, to when he sits down and cries when he talks about how he was genetically mutated as a character. And then when you see him being forced to save his best friend when they're holed up in a prison, to when you see him be James Bond on holodeck. The many shades of Dr. Julian Bashir is going to be number 8 on this list.
Well, Julian Bashir really is a just amazing character. He's got I don't know, he's got this kitschy outlook that he thinks he's just in this amazing place and all that sort of stuff. But later he becomes less of a bit of a jerk almost, I wonder. I mean, I don't know. It's not that he's a jerk. He's just got this kind of wide-eyed look, and he matures in such a neat way throughout the entire series. And yeah, he kind of gets that little extra bit when people find out that he's genetically enhanced and stuff. And I feel like that's kind of where Bashir becomes really cool, I guess is the best way to put it.
Hey, if you're sitting across the blackjack table from Dr. Bashir, would you like a 7? Would that make your odds better?
I don't know what you mean, because I've been to Vegas twice and I've never gambled. I know 7 shows up a lot the most if you roll 2 dice, but that's all I really got. So if he asked me if I wanted a 7, I would assume he's offering me pop, but I'm probably wrong. So number 7 is pretty simple. It's the Defiant, a warship, right? A true warship. It was made. It is sort of this like the frigate of death, right? If we think of all of the different Federation ships as different types of battleships or carriers or whatever, these exploration vessels, The Defiant is not designed for exploration. It is designed for one thing, and that is battle. Battle with the Borg originally, and I've always loved the Defiant patch where it shows it almost kind of like a shark, very sort of 1940 style, and its saying underneath isn't anything, to boldly go or anything. It's just assimilate this. And I always really liked that. I don't know if that's canonical or not, but it always made me laugh. And looking at this ship and the way it's created, it's ugly as hell. And I remember looking at it the first time, and I think because I was so young when TNG came out and they had everyone freaked out over the Enterprise D, I always just sort of knew it to be the Enterprise D, and that was it. Like, I just accepted it because I was so small when TNG first came out. But when the Defiant showed up, I was like, really? This is it? But now, I'm literally staring at my copy of the Eagle Moss model, and I just love it. I just love this ship. It says a lot about the Federation, though, socio-politically, because they are an exploration group, and the Borg spooked them so much that they ended up having to build a warship over it, and then they use it, and they use it with impunity within the arc of Deep Space Nine, that it really shows this other side of the Federation, much like you talked about Section 31. I feel like the Defiant kind of fits in there too, because this isn't a ship that is going to offer a helping hand. This ship's going to blow your face off, and that's what it's for. It's very, very fascinating.
Just a couple of things to add, a little piece of trivia. I don't know if a lot of people know. The Defiant is, I believe, the first animated starship in all of the franchise. It's the first ship to have purely existed on digital animation alone. Before that, they used a mix of models and animation, but this is the first one to be entirely animation only. So there's a piece of trivia. And I think, in my opinion, the Defiant, apart from being a really cool warship, is also a great platform for telling those more go out on a ship and do your exploration stories that we've fallen in love with TNG and the original series. You get to see Cisco go out there and be the captain. You get to see Worf go out there and be the captain, to a point where he almost becomes obsessed with being on that ship, and that's all that he wants to do all the time. You get to see it as a really cool platform for telling those ship stories. If Deep Space Nine, the station is about being on the shore, Defiant is what happens when your ship leaves the shore and goes into the ocean. And it's this really tiny yet incredibly powerful ship that leaves a mark on the overarching war, and definitely us as the viewer.
It's a good ship. It's a mighty good ship. Well, six, here we are. We're at number 6. What do you got for me, Shashank?
Well, it was a bit of a challenge to get to this point. I think it was definitely a struggle. It was a trial. Number 6, you guessed it, is another episode dedication. Number 6 is completely, entirely, unequivocally dedicated to trials and tribulations. There is no funnier episode to me in Deep Space Nine, because there are so many hilarious things that happen that people just walk away from, because the whole story is so fascinating. But when Bashir says, "I'm a doctor, not a historian," there is such a reference to the original series and another famous doctor from that ship, and just little funny things like that. And when what still boggles me to this day, that Jadzia remarks that Spock looks handsome, and today Terry Farrell's married to Adam Nimoy. That I will never get over that. So just for that alone, number 6 is Trials and Tribulations.
Yeah, it is such a good episode. And I mean, I had been watching the original series for so much longer. Obviously, it showed up on a couple of different TV shows, and I'm trying to remember or TV stations, and I'm trying to remember which ones it was, but I can't for the life of me. I just remember watching them in my grandparents' basement. And I remember that episode of Deep Space Nine coming in. I felt like they were very faithful to a lot of that original stuff. And it was done sort of as a, as I had mentioned earlier, kind of a vanity project idea, but They do have a lot of crazy awesome references, and yeah, for the predictability of things. I don't know if Terry Farrell and Adam Nimoy were dating at the time. That would make more sense. But if they weren't, or if they had never met yet, that would be terrifyingly awesome, cool, scary all at the same time.
Well, for adding such incredible, wonderful points, you get to pick number 5.
Well, number 5, you know, if I was to place myself anywhere within the Deep Space Nine canon, or the way Deep Space Nine has sort of built itself into what it ultimately has become for us, it has to be the Dominion War arc itself. We literally see the material conditions that create a war. We watch that war carry itself out. We watch the darker elements of how that war eventually finally gets its upper hand, and we see its almost ignominious end. That the Gamma Quadrant, the Dominion threat in the Gamma Quadrant really isn't fully gone, and not everything is perfectly resolved, and no relationships are 100%. And it's just so incredibly fascinating watching this entire arc start, and it takes us all the way to the other side. It really does kind of give you a weird vicarious look into what it must be like to live through a war. And I mean, no, obviously I don't think it gives you an actual feeling of it, but it takes a franchise we love and it puts it through a war, and we have to sit there and watch as people die, as things change, as things get worse, all of these pieces. It was a bold move. It was a bold act, and I really think it set the tone for TV moving forward.
If nothing else, outside of being a really cool arc and something that shows you what it means to be in war, absolutely, something that shows you what it is like to go through a conflict in which there are so many layers upon layers of right and wrong. The greatest thing, I think, to me, that the Dominion War accomplished was it showed me just how powerful conflict can be. On the one hand, you have a character like Odo, who has been looking his entire life to find his people. And he does find his people. But he finds that these people are the people that are hurting the people that have been with him all along. And then you get to see this person try to decide what is it, how do I even begin to choose a side here? And you get to see that play out. And on a political level, you get to see the conflict of Benjamin Sisko throughout the show, but especially in The Pale Moonlight. You get to see that culminate there, where you see a leader compromising, losing those morals, and coming to terms with what reality is and where to leave his idealism. So those really interesting, powerful conflicts are, to me, one of the crowning achievements of the Dominion War. Outside of the incredible character moments, the wonderful war that we get to see, the really cool animation, and the way it plays out, and how you see some people stick with it to the end, and how there is an other aspect to the war with the Bajorans and the people that are suffering. Just so many incredible things. Outside of all of that, the conflict is what really drives it home for me.
Couldn't have said it better, sir. So number 4, this is you.
Number 4 is Cardassian Nazism. I think the Cardassians are a really, really well done metaphor for the Nazis. Of course, they're metaphors for oppression and racism and the Russian era propaganda machines that ran. I mean, for God's sake, they decide a person's judgment for a sin before they're an actual trial. That is so twisted and ridiculous. It only could have come out of the Nazi handbook. The fact that not just that, but you actually get to see a full-blown occupation of a people, much like the Jewish people. You get to see Bejor suffer for 50 years under the Cardassians, and you in spite of that, you get to see in episodes that Gul Dukat, while doing his oppression, when they go back into when they go into flashbacks, Gul Dukat is sitting there in the chair, the guy who's running the oppression, saying, in spite of what you hear about me, I'm a friendly man, I'm a fair man. I don't know how people get that mindset, but when I went back and read some of the logs from survivors that got to interact with people at the forefront of the Nazi party, running around doing these horrendous things. Sure enough, there were people who were out there in secret and in one-on-one conversations saying, hey, in spite of what people think, I'm a good person. I'm a fair man. This is fair. So there are these really wonderful metaphors there. And such wonderful parallels, and the moral lessons that are there for us to learn and drag from, that it's incredible. And I can't believe that it's just a great metaphor.
Full agreement. I mean, watching even, going back to Gul Dukat really quick, you get to see what a Nazi has to do post Nazism, right? Like how do they reassert themselves? And Gul Dukat definitely takes a certain direction, basically by doubling down on justifying his previous actions. So absolutely. And maybe to a degree, sort of watching, if you want to take that kind of more Nazi Germany, post-Nazi Germany style, you can sort of even see that look of, what do we do now? Like, what direction do we want to head in? And I think they take a different direction from post-Nazi Germany. But no, it's quite fascinating. And then watching them become the oppressed later on, it's also sort of an interesting, different take. And it's not one I don't think we've seen very often in different types of story arcs before.
Well, we're getting down here. We're winding down. Barry, what's number 3?
It can be difficult to come up with thing after thing after thing after thing and think that you're going to be able to say very much or nothing at all about it. But this one doesn't. This may feel like I'm grasping at straws, but I really don't feel like I am. Think about the costuming in this entire show, and think of the way that costuming works to contrast and to show difference and culture and different nuances and all these different things, right? Like you think of Quark and Garrick and just the very fancy outfits that they have. Obviously, I would say that Quark's is a lot more flamboyant and Garrick's outfits are a lot more austere, but someone had to make all that. Someone had to put all that together. That was a ton of creativity. When you look at the almost recoiling feeling of watching the Dabo girls, right? And these sort of skin suits they had the actresses wear that look or seem like they're quite scantily clad. I mean, goodness, that's a very strange and odd way of kind of evoking the male gaze, but we know what that means, and I think that was done on purpose. Like, nothing against any of the female actors who have played and had to wear a very form-fitting uniform, but notice how you don't see that in Deep Space Nine. Your strong female leads are wearing functional outfits for the most part, as far as I can recall throughout my my entire time. So the costuming has a political piece to it as well. The way people are dressed is very intentional, and there's a lot more to it, right? You look at Worf, he's, the switch over from his two different badges. That's a very fascinating kind of look at how he transitions. Or you look at the transition of the uniform, and I know they made the Starfleet uniform look more movie fancy with the gray yoked one, which is always going to be a favorite of mine because I think it just looks badass, and it's the only uniform I don't own, so that's fine. But you think about the perfection and the honing of the Cardassian uniform and how people in Cardassia look and how they dress. The way culture is ascertained through clothing and cloth, and the way story gets built up through the clothing and cloth that cover the people we enjoy. It's very fascinating. It's a very, I mean, we could just talk about Garrick's clothes or what Jake wears, or even sort of the portrayal of the Dabo girls. It's interesting.
I don't know if there is anything else I can add to that. You covered that so well, buddy. So I'm just going to move on to number 2.
Fair enough.
Number 2. I'm glad this is my last one on the list. It's going to be ridiculous, or maybe it's something that everybody loves already. Number two for me, Ferengis. I love that this show reinvented them. This show gave them a second chance, from everything to the rules of acquisition to the really powerful single episodes and the arc that Quark goes through, to even the much bigger, funnier arcs of, hey, rules of acquisition and the way that plays in, to uh, just we've covered so much of it already when we talked about the Ferengis, but my favorite thing about the Ferengis on the show is that they're such a good metaphor for humans. They're such an exaggerated yet really wonderful metaphor for how humans are and how we work as a species and how much we value capitalism, that we've talked about before, obviously. But the whimsicalness, the entertainment factor, the underlying intelligence of it all, for that and many, many reasons, number two is Ferengis for me.
So I would say that their love of capitalism is actually sort of the poke at modern or contemporary humans. And it is for us to look at some of the absurdities of the value judgments we place on things and the commodification of resources and stuff like that. I agree, though, that the arc of the Ferengi is again, you know, I've said we could watch this entire series just through the eyes of Kira, and that would be a unwasted series. This could have been something, I mean, it fits well as a mini series within the series. So yeah, the Ferengi are so incredibly fascinating.
Well, we're here. We're at number one. Barry, what's number one on the list, man? Tell us.
Oh, well, I don't know. I feel like we've gone through so many different things that I don't really feel qualified to say that this is the best one, and maybe it isn't the best one of our points that we've had. I mean, we're not doing,
not at all.
You know, we're not ranking our treks here. If you want to do that, you can listen to Shashank and me do that on the PoliTreks episode. For me, it's just the influence itself of Deep Space Nine, the fact that so many people call this the dark horse, or the snotty-nosed redhead kid brother of the series and stuff, and it ends up being the most loved. I mean, so many people I know love DS9 the most, and there's got to be a reason for it. And if you look at the serialized nature of TV these days, if you look at the shocking moments that can take place, like when that Jem'Hadar cruiser flew into that Galaxy class ship, right into its deflector, blowing itself up and everything else, like that, you didn't see that very often before in Star Trek. I mean, TOS, I think there was a lot more of those kind of holy crap moments that I think would have happened back then, but that really was like whoa, what the crap, what's going on here? Or you look at the ideas of them creating the conditions for what would create the Bell riots, and that's influenced the way the American government's trying to run itself now. If you think about it, it's simultaneously something that brings me pride, and it's also something that's kind of got me rolling my eyes now, because I feel like the style that Deep Space Nine, I would say Battlestar Galactica, Babylon 5 also sort of took a bit of this as well. I'm almost rolling my eyes at the idea of that kind of film or that kind of storytelling. But boy, when Deep Space Nine came to the fore, its shock value on some of the stuff that it did really is what made it so amazing, because it made us see a very different Federation. And I think it made us consume our sci-fi a lot differently. After Deep Space Nine, I was getting into anime, cyberpunk, watching Ghost in the Shell or Akira, just to name a few. And I think about my development politically. I think a lot of the reasons why I have traveled down this path I have has to do with my experience with Deep Space Nine.
I couldn't have said it any better. And you keep putting me in these spots where I don't have a whole lot to say, but I think there is nothing I'll say will rival what you just said. So that was a great closer to our 25 things we love about DS9. We hope you enjoyed it. We'd love to see some of your own lists. Nothing to steal from Trek Ranks, I promise. Just throw things you love about DS9, things we might have missed, things you thought we were just bragging on about. And just all around, thanks for joining us. Thanks for enjoying this part of the show. These are lists or these kinds of things are stuff that we love coming up with. It's a little lighthearted, and it's definitely a break from the really deep, serious stuff we do. So thank you for joining us, and let us know if you'd like us to do more of these or maybe less of these. Either way, I don't see us stopping in any way. Are we going to stop, Barry?
I thought I told you that we won't stop.
Thank you. Yeah,
Okay.
just making sure.
Okay.
So until next time, live long and prosper.
And onward to our star society.